Hello everyone and welcome back to Make Believe, where we're playing World End Economica. Last time we had them both having lunch together somewhat, and Hagana putting out on the table why she had a problem with Yoshiharu, thinking that he's just a spoiled kid that stole money from his parents, and living on the moon, he has not passed through the hardship that people like Hagana had. Meanwhile, Mr. Toyama shows up and he talks with Yoshiharu about people, about his view, how he views people, and he went to talk with Lisa in private. I wonder what's up with that. I don't know if we'll find out anytime soon, but here we are. So let's continue. With me left here, the living room became strangely quiet, so I returned to looking over stocks one by one. My eyes pored over the numbers, but nothing stuck in my head. There were many things I should have thought about, which prevented the limited capacity of my mind taking any of it. Afterwards, the day became dark as the program changed to night, and it appeared that Toyama had left. Or so it seemed, as Lisa came down the steps by herself. He might have gone out through the door on the third floor to avoid running to Hagana. It appeared that it was a discussion that warranted sufficient preparation, and I could see in Lisa's facial expression when she returned to the living room. It was the first time I had seen her with an expressionless look as she poured herself a cup of water and just looked at it. Wow, she must have some really big news. That she seemed so serious that I couldn't really say anything. Lisa downed half the cup in one go and sighed briefly. She wiped her mouth haphazardly. When she raised her downcast face up, she was back to the usual Lisa. Why don't I prepare dinner? What was that voice? But somehow those words sounded tense and tired. I wondered what Toyama's talk was all about. Me too, Yoshiharu. Me too. Somehow, I didn't think it was a trivial matter of any sort. Oh, for sure. But even then, Lisa's behavior was kind of as if she had never crossed paths with Toyama, ever. Lisa was an adult. I believed that firmly. Thus, without asking any other questions, I just nodded my head. Also, it appeared that the computer terminal on top of the sink really was a trick of Lisa's. I wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or not. So, she left it there, making it seem that was recording, filming it, but it wasn't actually doing anything. What I did know was that when I saw Hagana again at dinner, she disregarded me even more than she did in the morning. Yeah, things are getting tougher and tougher. You have to patch things up before it's too late. Also, my feeling of guilt only increased. There's that too. Investing had run itself into the ground like a rock. There were now many questions and little time. How would this matter be resolved? I wondered as I lay in bed that night. Maybe being truthful might be the best option here. The next day was a day off. Now we're getting this shot so often now, huh? The actual markets were closed. The investment concepts virtual markets were likewise closed. Apparently, server maintenance and data aggregation were necessary, and thus I had nothing to do. So it's a Sunday? As for actual trading, I pored over every bit of news in the morning that was of any value or effect. Occasionally, when I looked at the news, it seemed as if something new was happening every day these days. But if you followed the news for at least a week, it was clear that this was not the case. Thus, with nothing better to do, I headed out into the afternoon. It was possible I'd had a run-in with the law if I loitered around here on a weekday morning, and that was enough to keep me shut in. But when I was living at home, I would often spend my days outdoors. If I didn't get out and do some exercise from time to time, I'd rot. Besides, I would most likely run to Hagana if I stay in the church. As for Lisa, after Torino came by, she unexpectedly had begun to meditate all the time. Really trying to keep her cool, huh? I packed the computer in my bag and slung it over my shoulder. After tying my shoelaces, I headed up to the third floor and headed out. Today was a clear day, and probably due to the days of rain that washed the atmosphere, I was able to see clearly for a fair distance. Been a while since we had a shot with like this place at rather. The laundry fluttered in part of the third floor yard, while lilies bloomed in the corner. The lilies that you guys kind of mess around with, huh? The numbers diminished because I had pulled some out earlier. Just like I was saying. Though the landscape in front of me seemed so tranquil, I was bothered by the number of problems that had cropped up. When I thought about them, the vastness and closeness of space right outside of the dome increased vague fears in me. I felt completely alone out here. But the more I thought about it, the more I knew it couldn't be solved. I shook my head and took off, kicking off from roofs and walls. I hadn't decided where to go. Instead, I had decided on what to do. And what did you decide? Oh, hello, lady. Good company. When I asked the stout old lady selling piping hot steam buns out front, she handed one with a pair of tongs to a customer and responded, "Are you looking for Chris?" I don't know whether or not they have a storefront or not. "Ah, the delivery company, I believe. What did you need with them?" "I see. Do you know where I should go to meet with them?" At 4 moves for one, the minced vegetable and meat bun was a good size and tasty. While having one in lieu of lunch, I asked the old lady at the shop about Chris' whereabouts. So yeah, he is looking for Chris. Is he trying to see if Chris can help him with Hagana? Just a minute. Let's see now. Since today is Sunday... If you're looking for Chris, she's out on the third block doing a delivery. The answer came from a customer passing by who overheard my question. Third block? Yep, over the tunnel that connects to the fifth outer section. On off days, she's usually over there lazing about. Ah, over there, huh? It was a favorite spot of mine. The old man who gave me the information proceeded to purchase 5 steam buns. The old lady quickly restocked the steamer with fresh buns. Thanks, I'll be off now. Sure. Old lady, give me a few of the big ones, will ya? Old lady, aren't you old yourself? I heard the old man joke around as I turned around and stuffed the bun in my mouth and prepared to run off. I was stopped by the old lady who handed the buns to the old man. Ah, wait a moment. In the films I see, there would always be someone playing the thief who would say something like, "What kind of idiot would stop when told to stop?" Ever since I left home and gotten used to being chased, those words had a strong impact on me. That was why I hesitated for a moment, switching to a stance where I could run away at a moment's notice and turn around. When I did that, the old lady took her tongs and placed a bun in front of me. "If you're going to meet with Chris, please hand this to her. That girl, she's a bit too skinny if you ask me." The words of the old lady, whose face was round like her steam buns, was enough to persuade me. I nodded obediently and took the paper-wrapped piping hot bun. I will be sure to give it to her. "I'm counting on you." Ah, what a nice old lady. She didn't even ask for money, so there was no reason for me to be suspicious. At the side of the shop was would it be kind of weird, like she's asking you to pay for something that she wants to give to another person? At the side of the shop was a stray cat napping in the glow of the sun. I certainly didn't dislike this kind of atmosphere on the outside. The pompous denizens of the White Belt, though they lived in a nice area, were certainly not this open. Everyone was suspicious of each other, and the mood showed it. Naturally, the residents of the White Belt who make up the middle and upper class of society were always in constant competition with each other in Newton City, so that was probably to be expected. But if I could become just as dull as them by getting wrapped up in this competition, then I had better exercise caution. As I thought about that, I ran towards the third block as mentioned to me earlier. On the lunar surface, the temperature and humidity level were fairly consistent year-round. I can imagine that since the weather is artificial. I heard it was mostly similar to spring on Earth. The temperature and weather made for a glorious day, I felt. Enough to make you perspire when exercising after eating a meal. After holding myself up in my room for a week, I was ready for some release as I leaped, hopped, navigated the extreme highs and lows of this city. One reason I enjoyed exercise, outside of the fact that I had learned how useful it was to condition my body, was that I put away distracting thoughts when in motion as I pushed forward. To be able to fly through the air through this town on a nice afternoon was great, indescribable feeling. I leapt from rooftop to rooftop, and soon I was at a cliff, in the third block connecting to the fifth outer section. The only way up was a rough path that ran around the edge, but I had no intention of going that way, so I ran like a cat up the side of the wall. Due to the low gravity, there were traffic signs by the cliff for the sake of others who do the same thing. Wow, really, it's that common? I used the sign as a stepping stone to make one more flying leap. Just at that moment, an old lady on an electric scooter came out of the tunnel from the direction of the fifth outer section, and seeing me jump from the bottom of the cliff did startle her a bit. As for me, I thought nothing of it, and as I reached the road, I looked towards sixth outer section. They said that she was in this area making a delivery, but I couldn't see her from up there. Just as I thought about that while I stared out into the distance, I heard a voice above and behind me. Ah! I turned around towards that familiar voice, and sitting on top of the tunnel was Chris. I really would like if this image changed, you know? We're still back with the old lady and the old man. Next to her was a large bag. In her hands was that beat-up terminal of hers she'd carry around. Thinking that was pretty lucky to find her this quickly, I grabbed the bun that the old lady gave me and chucked it at Chris without saying a word. What? It's from the old lady at the steam bun shop. Told you to eat it up. I see. While Chris looked at the wrapped package in confusion, she swallowed the saliva in her mouth. Just as I always did, I leapt towards a tree on the side of the road. Then, using that as a foothold, I did a 3-point jump and leapt to the top of the tunnel. Chris peeled away the paper timidly and didn't seem at all surprised as I leaped up to her. Perhaps Chris also moved like I did when she made her deliveries. There we go. Hello, Chris. And there's the steam bun and the terminal. And 2 bags. I thought it was just one. What are you doing here? I asked my question just as Chris bit into the bun. Due to the timing, Chris became flustered, a large chunk of the bun in her mouth. Oh, sorry. No need to be in a panic. Chris nodded dutifully, and after munching for a bit, she gulped with satisfaction. So, what are you doing here? I asked her once more, and Chris poured something out of her canteen into a cup before answering. I'm studying. But, isn't it Sunday? Yes. I was just intending to make small talk, but somehow Chris just took that to mean that she was somehow in the wrong and looked downcast. I was a bit surprised as I continued. No, well, there's nothing wrong with that, I think. You're studying math, right? Yes. That's pretty cool. Are you gonna ask Chris to help you out with the stocks? Huh? When it comes to studying, I always felt it was something you did in the darker room just grinding away. But study out here in a relaxed manner is, well, pretty cool. That was not entirely a lie. Lisa had once told me about a great artist or something who would seek out good places to isolate themselves in order to think through an important problem. But what I saw in front of me was entirely different from what I imagined. There was a large bag next to her, which made it seem as if she was just taking a break on the way to a delivery. It looked like she was using it as a cushion in her hand, In her hand was a canteen, and while talking, occasional sips from the steaming, warm-looking tea in her cup. She seemed to be deep thought as she looked at the beautiful scenery in front of her. This relaxing atmosphere was perfectly fitting for a calm girl like Chris, I realized. What? However, it seemed that Chris wasn't used to being praised like that. She looked away rather anxiously before becoming downcast again. But even then, it was easy to see from her reddened face that she didn't exactly hate that either. In any case, your bun's going to get cold. When I said that, she took a fleeting glimpse at the steamed bun, then looked at me again before looking back down. She then timidly started eating the bun. She was just like a small creature, and I had to hold back to keep from teasing her. I knew that Chris felt somewhat awkward as I stood up and gazed out at the scenery from the top of the tunnel. However, it appeared that Chris had finally gotten over her timidness, and she bravely stuffed her cheeks with the bun. I saw a good opening at that moment to break the ice. "Hey, there's something I want to ask you." "Yeah? Her obedient reply contrasted sharply with the fact that she was talking with her mouth full. Her lips had some bits of minced meat on them, and she wiped her mouth hurriedly when I pointed it out. You're friendly with Hagana, right?" "Oh, was I right? On my first choice?" Our family's cat, even when examined by the mass observation equipment on the orbital elevator, was probably just a stray that survived hitching a ride to the moon, despite the compression and low temperatures. But then, when you splash water in its face, it looks at you like she was looking at me now. But our cat could leap at me angrily when it came to its senses. Chris looked at me with upturned eyes, seemingly asking me if I was angry at her. "So, there's something I wanted to ask. Since I had been standing while Chris had been sitting, I was physically looking down at her, and I averted my eyes for the first time. Though I realized that this was kind of pitiful, I guess I really was feeling awkward asking a question like that. Do you happen to know what Hagana likes?" I tried to figure out the quickest way to resolve the unfathomable situation eating away at me, and this was my solution. She started to talk, but apparently she then realized that there was still some of the bun in her mouth. She closed her eyes in confusion before chewing and swallowing the rest of it, and sighed in relief before rephrasing what she was going to say. "You're talking about Miss Hagana?" "Yeah, you look like you come to the church often, so do you know anything?" Chris looked dumbfounded as she looked at me with innocent eyes, as though wondering what I was trying to say. I was still feeling awkward and then looked back at Chris, so in her Chris-like way, she might have thought that she had some strange misunderstanding of the situation, as her cheeks suddenly turned red and she clasped her hands together. "What? For Miss Hagana?" Don't get the wrong idea here. I brought my face closer in a threatening manner. Chris closed her eyes quickly and brought her hands up over her head in defense as she curled up. Well, of course I wasn't going to hit her. I set her up and she opened one eye and looked at me cautiously. "Well, because of a simple mistake, I did something bad, Hagana." "Something bad?" "A lot happened." I had a sour expression as I said it, which caused Chris to avert her eyes somewhat as she spoke timidly. "So, well, it's something to give her by way of an apology, right?" "In the simplest sense, yes." "Ah." As Chris said it, her expression changed. She had a distant look on her face, as if she was thinking about something. But perhaps she usually came here to think about math problems. It was more extreme. Just a quick glimpse at her made it hard to tell if she was a guy or a girl. Looking at her like that, though, I somehow had this feeling that someday she'd grow up to be a very beautiful woman. I can see how this can look like either a guy or a girl. With the sound of a small motor, a single-passenger electric bike left the tunnel. That was when Chris looked at me and spoke. "You're a good person, aren't you?" "Huh?" My response might have been unintentionally strong, but Chris fell back suddenly, and I could hear her start to giggle and laugh. It doesn't matter whether I'm a good guy or a bad guy. So do you have any ideas or not? Yes, thinks Miss Hagana likes, right? She said disobediently and with some hesitation. Something this annoying was definitely a very girlish trait. You're not a fan of girls, huh? I must definitely be bad when it comes to girls. I guess there's also that. No matter what the situation, I hated how I felt like a kid when there was a girl in front of me. She doesn't really say much about this sort of stuff. Anything works. Anything she might have an interest in, perhaps. Something she has an interest in? Since she seemed to have a frank personality, perhaps this kind of talk didn't happen often. But as I waited patiently as Chris pondered the matter, Chris looked up suddenly and said something. And the music stopped. Ah, you thought of something? No. Well, what? At my question, Chris pointed towards the front of the road at the bottom of the tunnel, and then spoke. There's Miss Hagana. I looked out in front of me, and it did appear that Hagana was on the path heading our way. Oh boy. And the music, though. Thanks to the slope of the hill, I did not appear that she knew that I was here. I was panicked as I realized that things would be bad if she saw me here. Keep quiet about me coming here. Look, this is the little spot that he usually goes. As I said that to Chris, I turned towards the cliffs behind me and leapt into the thicket of trees there. Chris followed me with her eyes as I went, but before long she could hear Hagana calling out to her, and she turned around in a panic. However, Hagana wasn't about to ascend to the top of the tunnel, so Chris gathered up her things, headed down, and disappeared from sight. Hagana's timing was rather annoying, but it was just a matter of finding another opportunity to talk to Chris. Yeah, he did not get an answer. So it's also possible that she was sharper than I took her for, and would discreetly try to get Hagana to tell her about her interests. I held on to that hope as I hid myself within the space between the unnaturally planted giant trees. But I couldn't stop wondering how Hagana had happened upon this place all of a sudden. There's no way she would have come looking for me, so perhaps Hagana needed to talk to Chris. Perhaps it was about her studies. That's what I thought, but remembering how Hagana looked as she walked down that path, I wondered if there was not something else on her mind. Everyone has something in their mind that we just don't know from the outside. It's not that I wouldn't be able to eavesdrop on them if I tried, but there would be no way to talk my way out of it if I were to be discovered. So I meekly took a detour and headed back to the church. Lisa wasn't in the living room, so I guessed she was in her room. I made some coffee, headed back to my room, and turned on the computer. In order to solve one problem, I made a single move. Thus, my next move for the next problem was to take a look at the stocks. However, the quiet of the church apparently was merely the calm before the storm, as they said back on Earth. Oh boy, and what is this storm? Several hours later, from far away I could hear the muffled sound of a telephone. Immediately afterwards, from the second floor, I could hear Lisa's hurried footsteps heading downstairs. Maybe it had something to do with her talk with Mr. Toyama. It had been 3 hours since Lisa rushed out of the church. The day had already turned dark, and after having eaten only one steamed bun for lunch, I was definitely hungry now. The church had fallen silent, an indication that Lisa and Hagana had not returned yet. Lisa had undoubtedly left in a hurry because of Hagana. Did she perhaps get scolded by the police? But I felt that there wasn't a reason to rush like that if that were simply the case. Besides, it was Lisa's hobby to shelter people like her, so I figured she would have been calmer about it. So if that were the case, then all I could think of were situations like Hagana's parents finding her, or her being about to get caught and needing help. That's an interesting thought. And thus, I was utterly worried, pacing back and forth in the living room. sneaking peeks through the curtains. Oh, look at you being worried. See, Yoshiharu, you do care about them. The timing of the phone ringing in the quiet living room made me jump in surprise pathetically. I would have been more hesitant if Lisa's terminal had rung, but the ringing came from the phone on the wall, so I picked up after the fifth ring. Hello? How? I was relieved to hear Lisa's voice, but at the same time, I realized she hadn't contacted me for several hours after leaving without a word, making annoyance well up in me. You get annoyed with everything. But before, aren't we missing a T over here? Before I could complain about it, Lisa continued talking. I'll be home soon, so could you start the bath for me? Huh? Make sure it's hot. Also, in the cupboard, I set aside some cocoa, so go ahead and make some. Make it as sweet as you can. Cocoa? Bath? Better yet, where are... Before I could finish, Lisa hung up. I looked at the telephone receiver I had just been talking to and furiously put it back in place. Why did I have to take orders involving baths and cocoa without even an explanation? Well, maybe she was in a hurry. Maybe she'll give you an explanation when she gets back. While fuming, I thought I would ignore her request. But in the end, I reconsidered and started the water for the bath. Good thing you reconsidered. After that, I followed Lisa's instructions. I rummaged through the cupboard to find a package that contained what appeared to be high-grade cocoa, and prepared it according to the recipe on the back. While milk was boiling in the saucepan, and the delightful fragrance was enough to make me want some too, and when I went to fetch an extra cup, I heard the sound of a door opening and closing from within the church. Oh, we're about to find out what happened. Muttering about her finally being back and sighed wearily. Though I hadn't really done much of anything. I turned off the stove since the milk had started boiling. Well, the hot cocoa is almost done, and we're about to find out what happened. Just as I took a saucepan in my hand, poured the milk into a cup, Hagana walked through the living room with great strides and dove into her room. That wasn't really an exaggeration, as the slamming of her door with all her might seemed to shake the church itself. Lisa froze in her tracks in the middle of the living room, looking like she was about to call out to Hagana to stop her. The always calm, somewhat times dim-witted, but dependable older woman was nowhere to be seen. She was so tired she didn't even notice me looking at her, as her outstretched hand towards Hagana eventually faltered. And when she realized that I was looking at her, she let out a small laugh. Thinking that I might have seen something that I shouldn't have, I went back to pouring milk into the cup. Did you prepare it right? Lisa turned towards my back and said those words. Shouldn't you be talking about something else right now? That was what I thought to myself, but I couldn't outright criticize her. Yeah, come on. Wait to learn the situation. Probably. I see. I'm sure if I turned around, I would see Lisa with a strange smile on her face. I didn't want to see Lisa like that, so I focused on pouring the milk instead. Oh, are you making two? I almost spilled the milk when I heard that. Yeah, I suppose so. Could you hand me one cup? At those words, I finally turned around, and I was startled. At first, it was dark, so I didn't notice it, but it was clear that the lower part of her right eye was swollen. Wow, really? What happened? At my words, Lisa inspected her top and pants. The feeling of irritation as I looked at her overrode the feeling of how silly her actions were. Your face. As soon as Lisa realized, she looked up and, with her right hand, touched her face with her slender fingers. Seeing how painful that looked made my face flinch in reaction. It was nothing. I just ran into something. It was nothing? I don't know about how it works on Earth, but on the moon, that doesn't look like it was nothing. Even I knew about Newton's third law of motion. Lower gravity means less weight, and less weight means less impact, because force equals mass times acceleration. I knew from experience because I had traded many a blow. Lisa looked embarrassed and had a strange smile on her face as I saw through her ruse. She then looked towards me. Would you mind giving me some cocoa? Normally, I'd be angry at her for dodging the question. However, I couldn't say any more with Lisa in front of me. At the very least, my face showed my displeasure as I stirred the cup I had poured milk into and placed it on the table. Thank you. Lisa smiled as she thanked me and took a seat at the table. After that, acting as if she had just returned from a trip into a freezer, she held the cup in her hands, blew on it several times, and then slipped slightly from it. Man, hot cocoa is really nice. Though, Kira's not really in the weather for hot cocoa. It was at that point that I realized I had forgotten to put sugar in, but it seemed Lisa didn't mind at all. Or rather, it felt like she wasn't really sensing the taste at all. She was doing it on automatic, wasn't really thinking about the taste, huh? Her attention wasn't on what was in front of her, but somewhere else. I deliberately slammed the sugar jar on the table with a thud. Sugar. Thank you. After saying that, she dropped a single sugar cube into her cup listlessly. And then, as if being satisfied for that single action, she didn't pick the cup back up. Well, I couldn't take it any longer and asked the question. Lisa's reaction was slow, and I thought she was just ignoring me at first, but she slowly looked up at me. What happened? As something of a freeloader, it's not like I had any direct connection to Hagana or Lisa, but I felt that I had a right to ask. Do I have to talk about it? And then, like a child, Lisa responded to me, smiling slightly. Rather than getting angry, I was getting scared. Even then, I gathered up some strength within me and spoke. Well, I did make you this hot cocoa. I had a sour expression on my face when I spoke, and Lisa looked at the cup of cocoa in her hands before looking at me once more. I could see that her face looked somewhat relieved as she was blowing the cocoa. That's true. You did make the cocoa for me. I also prepared the bath. Well, I suppose at this point, I can't just say nothing then. Lisa drank her cocoa and sighed. The silence was long. I felt that if I were to drag on any longer, it'd be stifling enough to knock me over. Yesterday, Toyama came over, remember? Yeah? Toyama? Yeah. This was a continuation of that talk. After saying that, Lisa drank the cocoa once more. They weren't words of explanation, but even without my urging, I had faith that Lisa would explain everything. Yesterday's talk was, well, I suppose you could say, simply a demand with regards to the loan. Huh? I raised my voice unintentionally in response. But I just paid the interest. Yes, Toyama was grateful for that. That was why he was so polite, you know? Now that she mentioned it, it was true that Toyama wasn't really being coercive. He was actually being humble and apologetic. On top of that, he even offered up a prayer to the statue of the crucified man at the altar. Perhaps he was well aware that he'd come with an unreasonable request. The loan, you see, he asked for it to be paid back in full. And my words stopped there as I did some number crunch in my head with regards to the financial situation of the church. The loan was at 50,000 moles with a monthly interest payment of 200 moles. However, I didn't even get back the 200 moles I had put up. Given that, there was no possibility of paying back the loan in full. Why do you have to? Is it written in the contract? No, the loan is indefinite. Toyama always does it like that. I can only loan money out to people I trust, so pay it back whenever you can, he would say. It sounded like a nice deal, but interest was still being collected, hence the situation was the same. However, Toyama did have a financial backer. This person gave him the original funds that let him loan out money to people. And that financial backer appears to have passed away in the hospital. Oh, So that was the reason why Lisa needed to repay the entire amount. But on the other hand, with his financial backer dead, wouldn't that be a good thing for Toyama? The person who gave Toyama money was apparently someone he knew back on Earth, and had very uncertain conditions for borrowing, he said. And then, when he died, a relative of his from Earth arrived and sold the loan document Toyama had to someone else. I see where we're going. Ah, I see. It wasn't hard to understand that. Yes, I can't blame those people either, but it put Toyama in a difficult situation. Up until now, it was a sloppily written contract. But because he had known that man for such a long time, they had mockingly added some extra stipulations to the contract. Oh my god, what is this extra stipulations? Toyama actually never managed to make a profit. Ah, I totally had a hunch. An unsecured loan at 6% interest isn't feasible. Speaking of which, Hal, you did mention that before, didn't you? And because of that, they approached Toyama to pay all that money back, and that total amount is well over 800 moves, I think. That amount of money was enough to build a nice small house in the White Belt. If you were on Earth, whether it be dollars, yens, or marks, or whatever your currency is, it was instantly a sum of money, no matter how you looked at it. I don't remember how much dollars are a mole, or any other currency, in fact, for a mole. Naturally, there's no way Toyama could have all that much money. If there was someone in need who was also someone he thought he could trust, he would loan a lot out to them, even when his own family funds were running low. Thus, all Toyama had in his possession were loan contracts. So the people who pursued Toyama to return the money said that if he wasn't able to pay back the money, then they would buy back the contracts at a discount. Really? If that's really how it is, that's not too bad. I thought that for a brief moment, but when Lisa looked at me, I realized that there was more to this. Oh, it is bad. So, in other words, the lender changed from Toyama to these other guys then? Yes, for us, the loan is indefinite, but as a precaution, the contract is reviewed every 3 years. Toyama said that if there are any issues found during that time, things will be bad. Bad? In other words, you have to sell everything off in order to pay it off. I don't really understand, but it sounds like the court can force a disposition. In that case, no matter what assets you have, they have to be sold in a fire sale. So even a loan of 50,000 moves could be difficult. So that is why he asked you to pay it all back now? Exactly. He said instead of hurrying to sell at a loss, take the time to find someone who will be willing to buy the property at a high price. Toyama honestly meant well when he came by. If everything Toyama said could be believed, that is, I wasn't going to say out loud though. I honestly didn't think that Toyama was a sneaky kind of guy. Of course, there were adults who possessed the down and dirty skills of deception, but if that were the case, I felt that Toyama would have presented himself in a much better light. But, and as Lisa punctuated the conversation, my mind stopped wondering. Hagana, that child's rather sharp, and yesterday it seemed that she caught wind that something was going on. And then, it seems as if she caught wind of this talk as well. In a fit of rage, did she confront Toyama then? I asked nervously as Lisa looked like she was slipping deeper into depression. She nodded. At that moment, the image of Hagana as she came to look for Chris above the tunnel crossed my mind. I went to Chris because I figured she'd know about Hagana, and Hagana probably went to Chris because she figured Chris would know about the neighborhood. Since Toyama lent money in this neighborhood, certainly she would have seen his tired appearance before. It was dreadful. Honestly, it caused Toyama a lot of distress. Even in normal circumstances, for a moneylender, even if they don't actually do anything bad, it's too easy to suspect that they are capable of doing something bad anyway. The whole business, gives people bad thoughts. Without knowing the facts, Toyama looks like a bad guy, doesn't he? Even then, he's someone who's known in this area and has been able to continue his work without any major problems. But... and that injury? Oh, this? Lisa laughed weakly, and her gaze turned from the living room to further down the corridor. And then, in a rather low voice, she spoke. Thanks to this, I was able to calm Hagana down from her anger. In other words, at that moment, Hagana had either thrown or hit something, probably. I know that she did that all for me, but that was always the end result. That time with me in the clothing store was the same thing. She had good intentions, but the lack of social skills really makes it tough. She always seemed to blame herself for what happens. And if there's anything that she can do, no matter where it is, she will try to do something, I imagine. A difficult personality. Lisa did not disagree with my mumbling. She's a serious girl, stubbornly serious. Why can't she get rewarded for her toils, I wonder? Honestly, what was the Lord thinking? Lisa seemed to laugh in sorrow, and then looked downcast before falling silent. But I couldn't stand the silence, and spoke up quickly. Well, what are you gonna do? Huh? The loan. Return what was given. That was expected. But if everything in the world went that well, I'd be living in a penthouse in Newton City by now. Yes, what should we do? As Lisa said that, she looked troubled as she smiled. If she really had no way to repay that money, then it might just blow my lid. I would probably think that she should do whatever she could and work. But Lisa actually had a means to pay it back. If she sold off things like those books, odds are she would be able to pay back the loan. Oh, don't make her do that, please. Selling all those books, it hurts. But even then, Lisa thought about that before and was at a loss. Lisa cared for those books as if they were a part of her, and if she were to sell those books, she'd never see them again. Studying ancient earth religions at a top-notch university on the moon, setting up a church, a relic from centuries past, sheltering runaways and those who have nowhere else to go, reading 100-year-old books from Earth about God on rainy days. Those were things that she enjoyed doing. For someone so unsuited for the moon, Lisa was very mature. Besides, if I were to make a list of people I could rely on, I'm sure Lisa's name would be propelled to the top. Even so, that same Lisa gave a troubled smile. There was no doubt Hagana ran over to Toyama's place and lashed out insults at him. If not that, then perhaps she pressed the point of selling herself off. As it was Hagana we were talking about, either possibility was believable. Lisa wrapped her hands around the cup of cocoa I poured for her, tilted slowly, and sipped on it. Cocoa always tastes good. Somehow, those empty words were gut-wrenching to me. Did you prepare the bath as well? Just as you asked me to. Thank you. I guess this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you and Hagana over the phone to remember to eat and get along with each other. It wasn't a joke worth laughing at, so I just let out a snort of discontent. It didn't seem as if Lisa wanted to laugh either, and she put down the cup and stood up. Thank you very much. There's another cup left. Lisa paused for a moment and laughed slightly as she shrugged her shoulders. I don't want to get fat. Oh, I hope you don't mind if I use the bath first. Huh? No, that's fine by me. I'll be angry if you peep. What's with that face? Just trying to lighten the mood? Of course I won't. I reacted reflexively, and only then did Lisa laugh happily. Yeah, it seems like she tried to light up the mood. Leaving behind that smile, she went towards the bathroom. It seemed that her manner of walking had a listless, forlorn manner to it. With a thud, the door closed, and I stared at it for no real reason. When I heard the door to the bath open and close, I averted my eyes from the door, as if a surveillance camera was looking right at me. My eyes then turned to the single cup left in the sink. it already started to cool down as a thin layer was floating on top of the milk. What was Lisa going to do after this? What was going to be done as already decided. Without a doubt, she was going to sell those books. It hurts. The answer was decided from the beginning. All that was left was a question of when she'd committed to it. Since it was someone else's affair, I could say like that. I was aware of this. That is why it was no surprise that Lisa was in the bathroom, crying. I heard from the ruffians in my hometown that the seaside, or even my bathroom, was a suitable place for an adult to cry. An enclosed space where no one bothers them, or a wide open space where no one can hear them. Was there a good resolution to all of this? Probably not, I suppose. If there was, then it would have definitely been carried out already. Otherwise, there would be no reason to suffer a slow death, paying interest every month. Paying off the principal would eventually pay off the loan, but if one simply paid the interest, then the loan would never go away. Any grade schooler knew that. However, Lisa had trouble paying the interest, and I had to step in the end. Thus, she had no choice but to rely on the final option. Lisa had to sell a part of her, which was better than Hagana selling off her entire body. That was probably how she convinced Hagana, I'd imagine. Much like Earth, the moon was also a place where only the strongest survived. On the moon, they were able to take a place that didn't have any signs of life and forcibly build a city on the surface. So there really wasn't any allowance for doing anything half-hearted. Space was cold and dark. I wonder if Hagana was crying. Perhaps she was as well. She was probably blaming herself. If I were in their shoe, it would definitely be quite painful. Lisa was a good person, and that made it all the more painful. Toyama had said that Hagana didn't care about Lisa just because she'd given her shelter. I had a feeling about that as well. If it was concerning anyone else in Lunar City that was as loony as Lisa, I wouldn't care as much. 50,000 moles. I mouthed that amount of money once more. 50,000 moles. While staring at the cooling cocoa in the sink, I wanted to curse God if he existed. 50,000 moles. How much money did I have? Yeah, I was thinking about that. He's probably gonna pay it off for them. Before Lisa came out of the bath, I went back to my own room and turned on the laptop. Well, I think we're gonna stop here today. So there you go. So we had Yoshiharu looking for an attempt at an apology, though that was interrupted by Hagana herself. Not sure if Chris would have even an answer to give at the time. But then we have the explanation of Toyama's encounter with Lisa last time. Her loan is due now. And a 50,000 moles is not easy for someone having trouble paying a 200 interest fee. And she's one of the few people that actually impacts Yoshiharu. So he's actually considering helping it out, just like he helped out the interest fee earlier. But I imagine that would make him start back from close to zero once again. So maybe then he can actually put it out there what he has been doing to get that money and get Hagana's help to speed up the process back up. You know, restart fresh. Both his balance and the relationship. But yeah, I think that's all for today. It started very light and it got heavier as it went. But yeah, I will find out more later. With that being said, see you next time. Bye.
Set the scene in a street.